Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. It mightn't always be obvious on a day-to-day basis that tillage farmers in Ireland have to compete to sell their grain on a global scale. Even though we don't export any grain and have to compete in an export market, our grain competes locally with imported grain at feed mills. Europe is one of the markets of which we compete against, and it's always interesting to get a view from a farmer who's farming in Europe. On this week's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Tim Bergin, a Dubliner who's farming in Poland near the Baltic Sea. Tim, you're very welcome to the podcast. Can I first ask you, Tim, whereabouts in Poland are you farming?
So we farm on the Baltic coast, which is northern Poland, and we're 1.5 hours west of Gdansk, and we're 3 hours east of Berlin.
Okay, and how did you end up there in the first place?
Well, long story.
That's okay.
But at the turn of the century, there was a good time to before Poland joined the European Union, was a good time to basically purchase land in Eastern Europe.
You decided to do that in comparison to, I don't know, extending your farming here in Ireland, or was there an opportunity to do it more so in Poland than there was here in Ireland?
Oh, I mean, if you go back to that particular time in Ireland, land prices were crazy. I don't know. I think you were talking £10,000 an acre and rising at that time. So it was prohibitively expensive to purchase land in Ireland. As well, in our potato business, we were renting land and we were paying anything from 300, anything up to £300 an acre to rent land for potatoes. So you could, at that time, you could come out to Eastern Europe, and for the price of 2 years rent in Ireland, you could actually buy land. You could buy freehold land in Eastern Europe. So that was one of it was the main reason, actually.
Well, I suppose you're pretty aware it hasn't got any better in Ireland. It's only got more expensive, and potato farmers are actually finding it even more difficult to get land now with trying to compete with dairy farmers. So it hasn't got any better necessarily.
As well, the infrastructure in Ireland was terrible. You were traveling around, bad roads and traveling distances, and probably planting too often on our own land. Our rotation was too short. It wasn't good. So we came out here to a part of the world where an awful lot of the land had never even had potatoes.
So as you're talking about your farm, what sort of farmed area have you got? Is it owned and all rented? And maybe just to give people an idea as regards the comparison to Poland versus Ireland, what's the typical rainfall, and perhaps what are the typical yields of some of the main crops that you're getting?
Right. So all the land we farm is owned. One farm, which is our home farm, is 660 hectares. And the other farm, which is about 40 kilometers away, is 500 hectares. The rainfall is quite similar to the rainfall that you get on the east coast of Ireland. However, we tend not to get enough rain in May and June. We tend to be a little bit short of rainfall in May-June period. Typical yields, winter wheat, we can push it to 10 tons a hectare, but 8 tons a hectare would be more average, and that would be a dried 8 tons per hectare. So that'd be at 13.5% moisture, and it would also be bread making quality. Oilseed rape is similar to what you would get in Ireland. We just aim for 5 tons a hectare. We don't always get it, but we need it. Potatoes will yield slightly more per hectare here, probably because of the soil type.
And how would you describe that soil type? Is it deep, rich, loamy kind of soil, or black ground, or?
Yeah, with a high enough sand content, but it's in general it's a sandy loam. In recent years, we've brought the organic matter massively up in the soil, so it's at the moment it's almost looks like, in places it looks like a fenland type soil.
Okay, and with those yields, which are really good, I mean they're hugely over that big area, it's extremely good. Are you dependent on irrigation for some of it or all of it, or what way does that work?
We have invested in irrigation as much as we can, with center pivot irrigation. We kind of invest another little bit every year, so eventually we'll probably have everything irrigated. We don't necessarily. Last year, for example, we didn't need irrigation, but the year before we did. So it's not totally. We don't totally need irrigation. We can survive without it, but it definitely, certainly for potatoes, it'll bring the yields up by 10 tons a hectare.
And in the area that you're in, and I got a quick look at it just on Google Maps as much as anything else. Is the type of farming you're doing, is that the predominant landscape, or is there a lot of forestry or grassland, or what's the predominant thing around you?
Not a lot of grassland. It's either tillage or forestry. There's quite a bit more forestry here than there would be in Ireland. I think about somewhere between 20 and 30% of the land mass is in forestry, and the balance is predominantly in tillage.
Okay. And when you look around, again, locally, 20, 30, 40 mile kind of radius, so you say you're farming one spot, which is 40 kilometers away. Is your type farming system, is that, in terms of your size, your management, that kind of thing, is that roughly speaking what everybody else is doing around there, or are you very different?
It's typical enough for this part of Poland. This area is Pomorska, where the farms historically were big. Before the Second World War, this was Germany, and the Germans had they had a history of having large farms. Average farm size, I think, was 500 hectares or something. So not a lot has changed.
And in terms of the produce that you produce, the grains and potatoes, do you store it all locally, or is it more a merchant storage type scenario?
Bit of both, really. It just depends on the season. If we have capacity and we think the price is going to go up, we'll store it. But mostly we sell it at harvest time. Dry it, or clean it and sell it at harvest time. But it changes every year. That changes every year. I mean, there was, I think, last year I don't think we turned the grain dryer on at all. The previous year we had to dry everything. So it changes from year to year.
Okay, I suppose it does run into having more machinery than you would like. And just talking about that, in terms of your farming system, your establishment system, if you like, which is probably the most costly, what sort of system are you running? Is it plough-based or min-till, or what sort of a system is it?
It's all min-till.
Okay.
Completely min-till. We haven't ploughed, I think, in probably 15 years.
And does the same run for the potato ground as well?
Yeah. We just go in and rip it. We rip it with a subsoiler. That's all.
Did you stone?
No.
Right. As in no stones, or it's just that kind of lovely land that you don't need to.
Not enough stones. Not enough stones to justify. We may look at it in the future. We're going to probably grow more seed in the future, and obviously with seed you're trying to remove the small stones. So we may look at destoning in the future, but at the moment we don't.
And obviously, I mean, your setup is quite big, and certainly in comparison to Irish farms. On a comparative kind of scale, because you talk about kind of small windows of getting things done in similarly to Ireland, is your machinery set up on a per hectare basis kind of similar to Ireland, or is it bigger or smaller, do you think?
Probably smaller. It's still too much in my eyes. We still have to have way too much machinery, but it's probably smaller than Ireland. For example, we just have one combine harvester for the 1,200 hectares, and it manages it comfortably. We just have one tractor, which is 220 horsepower, and we have 4 smaller tractors. So one 220 horsepower tractor does a lot of the main cultivation or planting.
And in terms of staff, and Tim, do you have a good lot of staff there helping you out throughout the year, or?
Seasonally, yeah. I mean, at planting time and at harvest time, we have more staff, but through the year, we will have one mechanic and 3 tractor operators and some office-based staff as well.
Okay. And of course, you're running probably a larger business than just farming in itself. You might maybe just give us an idea about, roughly speaking, what you're doing in that.
So the biggest part of our activity is in construction related and service related activities, and I think the farm accounts for probably less than 20% of the entire business. Unfortunately, it eats most of the profit. But
Geez, at that level, Tim, it's nearly getting into a hobby.
yeah, yeah, it occupies still, because it's agriculture. It occupies a lot of your time.
And your potatoes obviously is quite a large part of what you do in that. What sort of potatoes do you produce, and where, or what's the predominant kind of market, or where are they sold into?
In our particular area, or in this region, there is a French fry factory for McDonald's, which it's a Dutch-owned company called Farm Fritz, and they produce French fries for McDonald's in this hemisphere. And they would be the main buyer of potatoes. And I guess that probably 80% of all the potatoes grown in our region, that would be, say, in a 100-kilometer circle, 80% of those potatoes are for that factory. So it's processing russet type potatoes for the French fry market. And then the other potato industry that will be in this area is seed. This is a very, very, very good area for seed.
And your own potatoes, kind of both of those kind of go in those two directions, do they?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. In the last 6 or 7 years, we concentrated on the factory production, because it's the least labor intensive part of a potato business you can do, is just to grow for processing. And
in terms of quality, is it tricky to get that quality right, or not so bad?
Really not so bad. I mean, the varieties we use generally don't fail. They always seem to make a good frying quality. I don't know, is it the soil or is it the weather we get, but we rarely fail to make frying quality.
Tim, when you think generally about farmers around your area, and maybe in a larger kind of radius, if you like, kind of around Poland or your kind of part of the world, is there a similar amount of winter cereals planted this year? And how are they looking in the spring, after their time during the winter?
In our own particular area, there would have been the normal amount of winter cereals planted, which is predominantly most of the tillage areas planted in the wintertime are planted for winter cereals. The general consensus in our area was that the winter triticale did not survive the winter very well. And in a lot of cases, it needs to be replanted, but that's only local to this area. I think most of Central and Eastern Europe, the crops came through the winter okay, but suffering now with a very, very late spring. Temperatures are still low. They're not predicted to rise until this weekend. So looks like there's about 3 weeks of growing season for the winter crops has actually disappeared already.
Okay, that's likely to have an effect later on in the year, I presume.
Yeah, and spring crops. I mean, none of the spring crops are even through the ground yet. Nowhere.
Are they planted, Tim? Are they all in?
Yeah, pretty much in. I was down in Hungary last Friday, and in Hungary, the spring cereals had been planted 6 weeks, and they still weren't through the ground. That was mainly because of drought, because of dry weather. So it's a late spring all over. It's a really, really late spring.
And are you kind of waiting on some rain as well? Has it got dry with the cold as well?
No, we're not dry yet, but we expect to go dry in May and June. We expect that. We've good cover though, so we probably won't suffer from drought too much. Hopefully won't.
Okay. Well, I suppose like every season in Ireland, there's a lot to play for over the coming 2 months, I suppose, is the big ones.
Yeah. I think in general in Eastern Europe, you could or in Central and Eastern Europe, you can say that the yields are going to be back. There's no doubt about that.
Speaking about which, obviously, if yields are back or predicted to be back, prices are definitely riding an awful lot higher this year than they have been for some time. What way do you see it across in Poland? Are they being reflected reasonably well in that, or is lots of farmers over there, are they participating in forward selling of grain?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are forward selling or forward selling a portion. I think we have probably forward sold a third of the predicted harvest at this stage. And probably by June we'll have sold at least half of it. So yeah, people are forward selling. Yeah, I think the history of every year proves that once the combines start rolling and the grain starts coming in, the prices drop anyway. So that's why people are forward selling. But probably taking a long-term view, probably all of 2021 and into early 2022, there's no reason that prices should drop back.
Well, on that very encouraging note, as you'd often hear some people saying, we'll definitely end there. Tim, thank you very much for your time. It's been great to chat to you and get a view from Poland and Eastern Europe. We'll touch base with you again in maybe a couple of months' time again, or maybe towards harvest, just to get an idea about how it's going with you in terms of your own farm and around your region. It's always great to get that view. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge this week. My thanks to Tim for joining us on the podcast. Don't forget, the next episode in the series of crop agronomy webinars is on Tuesday, May the 4th. More details are available on the Teagasc website at www.teagasc.ie/events. Don't forget, if you like the podcast, recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming news and advice, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.